Put your red shirt on and a brown coat too. Everybody's joining the crew. We got just one drink that we rule them all. Hope fruit remember your thoughts. Get your Uru fingers and your needler guns. A sonic screwdriver or a sword +1. Use Valerian steel if it will get you to come. To the Geek Tank. To the Geek Tank. The Rocky Mountain Geek Tank.
Hi, I'm Guy,
Hi, I'm Troy.
and this is Geek Tank.
Your 1.5 pounds of ground beef mixed together with 1 egg, 1 chopped onion, 1 cup of milk, 1 dried cup of breadcrumbs, salt and pepper to taste, 2 tablespoons of brown sugar, 2 tablespoons of prepared mustard, and 1/3 cup of ketchup baked for 350 degrees for 1 hour sized podcast.
I'm guessing that we are going to discuss meatloaf today.
Whatever gave you that idea.
I know, right?
So, for those of you who are unfamiliar with our show, we've changed our format slightly. Guy is coming right off of the tail end of his 1 hour show that he does for Foxtel Graphics and drawing and such. So we have zero time to prepare.
So we just guess.
Yeah.
However, clearly we are going to, as you might have guessed from our little intro there's going to be discussion about the passing of some recent celebrities.
Yes.
So,
in fact, it was requested. I did not forward the memo to you, but one of our viewers did request that we do an episode on Meatloaf. Although, honestly, I don't know enough about the guy to do an entire episode, but I do feel it's worth touching on.
yeah, well, we should at least discuss it. There are a couple of things that, we've had a couple of shows where we've discussed the passing of celebrities and their impact on people. And I keep thinking about different things about this, different aspects of this. In fact, this morning, I was just looking up George Burns. I was on Reddit, and there was a random George Burns quote, and I thought, oh, that's right. George Burns passed away just a little while ago. And when I went and looked it up, he passed away in 1996. That wasn't a little while ago.
Right.
But George Burns was part of, like, an integral part of my childhood, like, as an old man, because he was born in 1896. He died in 1996, just like Betty White, just shortly after, except unlike Betty White, just shortly after his 100th birthday. And he was the same kind of thing, a vital and important character, even in old age, somebody that we knew and loved and things like that. And so I keep thinking about aspects of this. You have these long-lived people who reinvent their careers as old people. I mean, that was part of George Burns's shtick. It was part of Betty White's shtick. But then you have the flip side. You talk about the people who had a career that was critically important to be a young person, and that was their thing. And I think a lot about singers specifically who are like this, looking at John Bon Jovi now and looking at, they're all older than you and I, and their age is showing. They can't just bounce around on the stage anymore. They can't jump around. They don't have a reinvention. Comedians can reinvent easily because it's funny to talk about, when you're younger, you think things that are funny are things like your cat being weird, or as in the case of George and Gracie, Gracie was a ditz. George was trying to always make her be smarter. And in reality, Gracie was actually very smart and always outwitted George. And that was how their comedy team worked. And that's what made that work. And it was funny because it was playing on the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s tropes of men and women and where we were at the time. Well, By the 1980s, clearly that was no longer a thing. And to boot, Gracie passed away in 64. So he didn't even have her anymore to play off of. And so he reinvented with, isn't it funny all the things that happen with old man now? You know, I'm an old man, so isn't that funny? And he could reinvent and pivot. And he did the same thing that Betty White did, where he pivoted on the concept of, isn't it funny to watch an old man say bad words? Isn't it funny to watch an old man be actually pretty wise and pretty hip? And isn't that funny? And he pivoted a lot on that. And Betty White did too.
And of course, in 77, he played God, and before Morgan Freeman. But then Morgan Freeman, of course, usurped him of that as being the best God so far. Right. Next to Alanis Morissette, I suppose.
Alanis Morissette was awesome. But I keep thinking about, like, where do singers pivot? Right? They can't. You can't.
Yeah, what do old singers do? And it's some of them, you know, totally shift gears. Like Denny Elfman, lead singer of Oingo Boingo,
Elfman's
shifted over. Right. Yeah, he became a composer and started. Yeah. Kind of the same thing with David Byrne from the Talking Heads. He started doing a lot more instrumental compositions as he went on from the Talking Heads. But yeah, it's a lot of these bands, and then that's when you have this band from my childhood is now reuniting for another tour type thing.
Right. I mean, that seems weird. But then I look at what I'm doing with my life. And I have been a comic artist since I was 14, 15. You know, I knew what I was doing, or I knew what I wanted to do at 14 or 15. As an artist, I'm still doing it at 50. And probably will do it until the day I die. Brent and I were actually just discussing this on my show about the idea of, you know, actually doing pages and things like that. But I've had good days. I've had bad days. You know, I've had days where I'm on and live, and I've had days where, you know, I feel like I've had a 2-year bad day here going on with COVID, but that's okay. I think we all are. But I mean, I think about, like, if I were a singer, and it's just a roll of the dice that I became a drawing artist instead of a singer, there's no pivoting from my point of view as a writer or an artist. I don't need to pivot. You know, I can just keep creating art until I no longer feel that muse or I die, whichever one comes first.
Well, the pivot would probably come into what aspect you're going into. Like if all of a sudden the Denver Post was to contact you and say, hey, we want you to give us an episode of The Springs every day for every episode, then you're going to have to completely pivot off of what you're currently working on and just go full force into the comic aspect of it.
Yeah.
So you've got facets you can shift to. It's all still related to art.
Yeah, it's all still related to art, and that would be, to me, I mean, because that's what I keep thinking about. I've known singers in my life, and they are just as driven by a muse as I am. It makes no sense. It's completely illogical. It's a completely irrational thing. They just have to sing. They have to sing. I have to draw. Sometimes I have to sit there and spend an inordinate amount of time plotting out stars, but I have to draw at some point. You know, it's the nature of the beast. And so I think about this a lot, about the way that we perceive people and the way we perceive especially celebrities.
What's their contribution of what they give to the world? Like Meatloaf, what I've done is double check here real quick because I don't remember. Yeah, it was two different names. Michael Leaday and Marvin Leaday. He's born under Marvin Leaday and I guess changed it to Michael Leaday. And then under a lot of his movies, he's credited as Meatloaf a Day. And it's he went Bad Out of Hell was the album that like sold like 500,000 copies or something like that, and got like second in the Guinness Book of World Records for the most sold albums. but
Right.
he went on tour for that and blew his voice out and had to like not sing for like 2 years to recover. Which has to be like, imagine if you blew your handwriting hand out and you can't, or drawing, and you can't draw for 2 years.
I've actually
About
feared that a number of times. One of the reasons why I jumped on getting a COVID vaccine was
Mhm,
because one of my art buddies got COVID and it knocked out his hands.
mhm. Speaking
And
of, so far the cause of death is being listed as COVID for Meatloaf.
oh,
Yeah,
that's a bummer.
so it's one of
Um,
those things.
so Brent just PM'd me and said, "Are you guys seeing my comments?" And I'm like, "Yes, we
Oh,
are. But
oops,
we're
sorry.
using StreamYard. Sorry."
I was too caught up. Um, Not only
So I've
saying,
been
but
putting them
yeah,
on
he
screen.
was doing acting. He actually insisted. One of the things I've found out in my research on him is that he insisted on not singing in his films because he did not want to be stereotyped as a singer. He really wanted to give his acting career a full shot as an
Right.
actor.
A
And so
viable chance.
yeah, so there are only two that he sung in, and it was Rocky Horror Picture Show and Pick of Destiny with Tenacious D.
Mhm.
Um, but for me, I know that at the time when he was at his peak, my brother really liked him,
Your
and
brother.
so I knew of him, and I knew of him as in being in Rocky Horror Picture Show because that was a body type that my brother fit, so he could portray that character on stage. Eddie, his character in that. But the music for me at that time never grabbed me the way it did, I guess, some of my peers.
Hmm.
I was always more into soundtracks. Is the weird thing, and like the instrumental soundtracks, like Raiders of the Lost Ark, all the John Williams stuff, Vangelis, Tangerine Dream. Those were more of what connected with me in the '80s, and then like a little, and then in high school, due to peer group, I got a little more into Led Zeppelin and stuff, but not as much as it seemed everybody else did.
I guess I never knew that, but yet another one of those weird parallels that you and I have.
Hmm.
I mean, the fact that you said Tangerine Dream, and I'm like, oh, that's good. I've got a few of those albums, and
Hmm.
like Exchange, which was another group that was like that, and um, what was it? Optical Race by. I don't think it was Tangerine Dream. Might have been Tangerine Dream.
It's not ringing a
Optical
bell.
Race, but anyway,
But yeah, I mean, my peer group, we're all into AC/DC, Motley
sure.
Crue, all of those, and it's just it never quite hooked me the way it did them, and so I recognize how devastating it is for people who were fans of Meatloaf of his passing,
Hmm.
and all of it's a geekdom, and
It's a geekdom. Well,
so
music is a geekdom. There's a
yeah.
geekdom out there. I mean, it's funny that we were all geeks in different aspects. Um, but metal people had a specific universe that they
Mhm,
were in, a specific geekdom, right? I mean, like there were people who were into pop music, there were people who were into, jazz or whatever like that, but the truth is, the metalheads were a specific group of people, which implies to me, just like it would uh, with our beloved sports fans, that there is an actual like a specific something. There's something in metal that is different than everything else in music, because you've got all of these different aspects and different groups and different, but there are definitely metalheads.
mhm.
They're a specific they're a very definitive and what's the word I'm looking for, defined, I guess, is defined, clearly defined. They're a clearly defined group, you know um because like the girls that listen to pop music were not defined by the pop music. They were defined by their makeup or their hair or going to the mall. You know what I mean? That was a
Is
definitive.
the appearance.
Right. That was a different defining set. Whereas metalheads were defined by metal music.
Mm,
They listened to AC/DC. They listened to um,
Motley
to
Crue.
Motley
Yeah.
Crue.
The big thing I remember is the blue jean jackets was big in that crowd, and then using ink pens
Megadeth.
to draw the symbols and the band names on their jackets. Long hair,
Always long hair.
long hair. Yeah, that was one of the cliques in high school, was the long hair. Sometimes like curly hair, long hair aspect, and then you had the pop music, like you were talking about at the time in the late '80s. There's like I call it the wall of hair. For some reason, girls would moose their front of their hair up like straight up like a wall type thing.
Yeah.
I just remember in a band, saxophones were behind the flutes, and the entire flute section were all females, and they all had that. So it was a wall of hair.
Wall of hair. Wall of hair. Do 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 do. Okay,
that's got to be a band.
There's got to be, yeah, like Flock of Seagulls, which was also a wall of hair. It's just it was two sides of walls of hair. Double wall, a moat of hair. So the thing that I notice now, because actually in my old age, I've gotten into more metal. I got into metal, oddly enough, through J-rock metal, so Japanese metal, and now have made my way back to 80s metal and gotten kind of into Scorpions and, AC/DC, Megadeth, that kind of group there.
Right, because that's the source material for the J-rock. That's where
it comes from, right? Yeah. And I find it interesting that that's where how I've made this sort of end run coming back. So I've just recently rediscovered Meatloaf and his work. And so, but I'm not, I mean, I wouldn't call myself an expert by any stretch, but I find that an interesting thing. But one of the things that I think is very important about metal that does make it stand out is metal is often storytelling, and it's not, I love you and I'm pining over you or whatever, which is what pop music generally is. Love songs in a lot of ways. Metal is heading out in a different direction altogether. You think about some of the songs that are pivotal on these things. These songs all had a story. Sometimes they were telling science fiction stories. Sometimes they were telling, like all these, I mean, like, or historical stories. I mean, I think about Scorpions and Tom Sawyer, and things like that. That was what made metal different. It was a storytelling medium. And that's what makes the Japanese version of it also interesting, because they're using it as a storytelling medium too, in a lot of ways. And it's sort of got the same roots, which is why you will see things like, you'll see Pantera opening for Baby Metal, which doesn't seem like those two should fit at all, but they do.
Well, they're both hardcore metal.
Right, they're hard. I mean, and Baby Metal's speed metal. And the more that Baby Metal has evolved out of being cutesy, when they started, they were cutesy. The Give Me Chocolate. That was like their biggest, like, first hit. And all they wanted was chocolate. And it was all about, giving them chocolate and stuff like that. And it was cute and fluffy. But then they went, Rob Zombie. Rob Zombie, that's actually one of the funny stories. Like, Rob Zombie took pictures with Baby Metal, and his fans started turning on him, and he just laid the smackdown on them. He's like, those girls did like 6 sets in a row and never stopped moving. They are more hardcore than you've ever been. And I was like, whoa. He's like, they were up on stage and they were working their butts off out there. He was like giving them all kinds of hell. And I thought that was pretty cool. But, that's the thing, right? Like, early on, this cutesy metal was one thing, because there's like Bandmaid is another one, which is cutesy metal. They're all dressed as little gothic maids. And that's their shtick. And all it really is the Japanese have taken a slight twist to it. But the songs still have the same feel of they're telling a story, or they're trying to make a point, a solid point. Baby Metal made a song called Ijime Dame, which is no bullying, absolutely no bullying. And it's all about not bullying in school. And that's not a cool thing to do and stuff like that. Important when you're a senior in high school, which is where they were when they wrote that song. Now they're in their 20s, and the things that they're writing about are like women power and empowerment. And that's a different story. But that's where they are. That's what their position is in. And they're in a culture that's behind us by 20 years.
Right. That's
So
they are still suffering. I mean, as bad as America has it with their misogyny, Japan
it's
is a
even
step
worse.
behind, even worse than that. Speaking of stories, one of the things that I noticed, because I wanted to go back a few days ago, I started listening to a little bit more of Meatloaf. And speaking of stories, I thought it was interesting how the song Paradise by the Dashboard Light is actually a cautionary tale of making choices while in being the heat of lust and being
Right.
horny.
Well,
Because at first
he
it
seems to
seems,
have a lot of that.
yeah,
Makes me wonder what regrets he had in life. I wonder how many little meatloafs are out there because that seems to have been a recurring theme. I'll do anything for love, but I won't do that.
which
Um,
that was interesting too. I never listened to it like in detail, so I assumed the surface aspect of it,
mhm.
but it was actually just poor wording in the grammar. Because when you go back and look at the lyrics, he says all of these things that are amazing that he will do, and then he's like, "But I won't leave you,
Right.
so I won't do that." And then, so if you don't listen to it very carefully,
You missed the
it comes across as him being like putting all these extra conditions on love, but really his only condition is, "I won't leave you for love. I'm staying. I love you too much to leave," type
right.
thing. So that was just bad wording.
Which, to be fair, I've never listened that deep to that song either,
Yeah,
and just read it on the surface as well, which is I'll
yeah,
do anything for love, but I won't have sex with you.
right. But the only
Which
reason I know that's
maybe he
because
went with. Maybe he was like, yeah, that's not a bad message. Who knows?
but I only knew that because I went back and was using the lyrics when I wrote my NDK thing to you. So because it was like I don't even remember now. I'd have to go back and look at the email. But I was parodying that since you
Right.
read everything word for word.
Because I read everything at the meetings.
So I take advantage of that and give you a bunch of stupid stuff to have to read out loud.
That's fair.
But
I enjoy it. So
yeah.
there's
But Meatloaf, the thing I've been seeing, because I do have a lot of friends who like Meatloaf on Facebook, the reoccurring thing I've
but
noticed,
they don't like meatloaf anywhere else, just on Facebook.
just on Facebook, is that it comes back to that thing we've talked about before about separating the performer from the art. Because I guess in his later days, he started to kind of shift gears of where you would expect an artist to go politically, and was saying things and doing things that was going against what some of his fans appreciated.
Right.
And
Started heading politically off of his fans' base.
right, which as all things are going to be, some fans are going to be on board with what he's saying, other fans aren't going to be on board. But it was one of those things where people were saying how much they appreciate what his music did for them and how much they appreciate the music, even though him as a person went a different direction than where they would like to have seen him go.
I saw recently Jason Isaacs, who was Lucius Malfoy
Mhm.
in Harry
Harry
Potter.
Potter. Yep.
And he was also, as a
Yep.
side note, also in Discovery. So he entered my universe as well. He recently said something very interesting that I thought was very wise, because he went out there and said, I'm not going to stop supporting J.K. Rowling. She and I don't agree on things, and I don't see eye to eye with the way that she's portraying certain events, and that's not what I think. However, she has also done all of this really good stuff with the Luminos Foundation, which has helped thousands of kids all over the world get a better life. And I feel like that deserves some kind of acknowledgement. And I thought about that too, and I thought that's probably a better way to look at the world. Because I'm thinking I'm having that problem now with Joss.
Mhm.
You and I, big Joss fans. And now we're finding out that Joss was not good to his
Right.
people. And it's coming out that that's the case. I think there's a little bit of all kinds of things going on now with this particular thing. For one, I feel like Joss lived in a different era with movie making. I've been on set. It wasn't fun. Not always. People get mad, people get very frustrated. People threaten people to get them to do the right thing. I have heard horror stories. I've never witnessed horror stories, but I've heard horror stories from the sets where, like, little things like on the Galaxy Quest set, nobody told Sigourney Weaver that the character Guy was going to scream on the transporter pad. So when she jumps, that's legit because nobody told her that was happening. So he really did startle her. And the director did that intentionally because he wanted a genuine performance out of Sigourney Weaver. Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, during the scene in the abyss where she comes back and they have to bring her back to life on the floor of the set. They rip open her shirt and she's topless effectively for this scene, and she has to play dead the entire time, and they're doing all of this, and James Cameron isn't getting the performance he wants out of her, so they're doing it over and over and over, and she's losing it. And finally she gets up and stomps off, and she threatened to quit that day. She threatened to walk off set and walk away from that movie because of that scene. So they push really hard. And I know that directors play this game of how much do I mind screw my actors to make them give me the performance I want them to, that is within agency of an actor. And a lot of the stuff from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there was no agency for an actor. So you sit there and think about this and you're like, okay, yeah, Joss had some oof,
Yeah.
right?
Well, some of the stuff he said goes beyond that. It was
Right.
not for
It does.
performances.
It does.
Yeah.
There is a whole bunch of crap that's over here on the other side of this wall. But on this side of the wall, what he did to Charisma Carpenter, the stuff that you're hearing about from Michelle Trachtenberg, things like that. But the stuff that was not the don't leave him alone with me part, all the other stuff she was saying, the stuff that's coming from the actor who played Cyborg, all of that, or even for that matter, Gal Gadot, all of that, I think could be chalked up to what I was just talking about. The stuff on the other side of that wall, no.
I think because of the stuff on the other side of the wall, it makes me more sus of him doing what you think he's doing as far as being related to he's just trying to be a director and get them to do stuff. I think he takes a certain level of enjoyment out of it, but it's one of those things where we weren't there, and but I always say you gotta put your bet on the victims. You can't put your bet on the other side.
Right.
But like something you had said while you read that from Brent, something you said, it's caused me.
Shelley Duvall. That's a good example is
Yeah.
Kubrick and Shelley Duvall. Brent's referring to. I'm just going to bring this up on the stupid screen here. Because Brent said I could, and so there's that. But you're not wrong. What Stanley Kubrick did to Shelley Duvall, way too far. Do you know the story of that? I am shaky on the story of that.
I've heard it, and I'm of course not remembering it fully well. I remember it was very emotionally traumatic for her. But what I was going to say was I've kind of reassessed my thing because you say like we are fans of Joss. I've kind of changed how I look at stuff. I'm a fan of someone's work, doesn't mean I'm a fan of them.
Right. But you think about things like Firefly. right? We are big fans of Firefly.
Right.
But a lot of the DNA of Firefly comes from Tim Minear. And a lot of the DNA of Firefly comes from Nathan Fillion's
Yeah, the
wonderful,
performances.
very wonderful, hysterical performances where he deadpanned stuff that was just perfect. Or, for that matter, Alan Tudyk, who is brilliant in all things, especially portraying birds. Or, you know what I mean? Like the things that they did. And then there are the counter stories. For example, in Objects in Space, which is the one where the guy infiltrates the ship to get River, he does this scene where he threatens to rape Kaylee, right? And the way he does it is so horrible and so devastating. And listening to the commentary, when you listen to the commentary, Jewel is saying, I remember this scene and I remember you saying, do you want to push further? And she's like, I can push a lot further. And he goes, push further than you think you should go. And she did. And that was the take they took. And that sounded very much like he gave her the agency to do that scene and it's devastating to watch. That's all Jewel. You know, that's what she's doing on this one. She's pushing further on that. So he wasn't all bad. You know, it wasn't like he was horrible the whole time. There were genius pieces of it. This all kind of comes back to Meatloaf when we're talking about Meatloaf, what he says, or for that matter, Bill Shatner. Bill Shatner is now starting to be all over the board. He's everywhere, but he's 90 years old. You know? So is he still our Captain Kirk? He will always be our Captain Kirk. That's never going to change. Right?
So you do. We I maybe after the show we can do this, but you do need to watch Don't Look Up, because there's a hero in it who says stuff and they just write it off by saying he's from a different time. You know, it's just to kind of gloss over how incorrect he is.
Well, you don't gloss over, and that's the problem. Like, our society is so black and white. Like, we can't perceive understanding what people say except in a whole piece. And this brings me back to George Burns.
Mhm.
What George Burns was in the 20s, 30s, and 40s was relatively misogynistic as a character. Looking at that stuff now, we'd probably say he was wife abusing. He was abusing his wife. Even though the comedians themselves had set up a pattern where she got the best of it in the end so that he looked like a dopey husband, that was an evolution between two well-versed, very experienced comedians. But it still doesn't look well now. But George Burns then in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s is relatively timeless, even though he's a little raunchy. You know, he kind of, but that's part of his shtick. You know, that's what makes it funny, is you don't expect old people to do that. So it's back to do you look at George Burns's early work and say the man was a misogynist, and then write off all the stuff that he'd done later in life with a pivot? And if the answer to that is no, of course not, then why would you do it when they do it the other way around? When they were really good in their early years, and then in their later years they pivoted and went weird.
Well, you got to separate the character too from that. George Burns was, from what we could tell, a lot like his character in Burns and Gracie and his old show. Whereas, like, it's if the actor is saying and doing things, or take J.K. Rowling for that example, is saying stuff. Um, it's not a matter of how she grew up, and that it's how is she adapting to the new information given to her. It's
Right.
acceptable to be on the wrong side of enlightenment as long as you're willing to become enlightened with the new information given to you. This is take for example pronouns, since we're talking about J.K.
Mhm.
Rowling in that aspect.
Oh,
Pronouns matter to some people. Just because they don't matter to me, you could call me she or her or they or well, it doesn't matter.
it doesn't matter.
I don't care what you call me. It's not because I don't identify necessarily as any particular
Oh,
thing.
that's right.
It's just because it doesn't matter to me. But because it matters to other people, I have to become self-aware of knowing, oh, this thing that does not matter to me in the slightest does matter to people. Therefore, to respect them, I need to make it matter to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm having to adapt it, because you and I are from a different time.
We are.
We're from a time, and this still exists today, and I'm sure Texas and Kentucky. People will get offended if you call them the wrong pronoun. Particularly, a guy will get mad if you call them a girl, because they are in the root of the back of the mind misogynistic in that aspect, and they get offended by it. And it has nothing to do with them. It's just, it's weird to me that people
It's the
take it so
Canadian
much.
law.
Yeah,
The New Zealand law, I think, is what you can call somebody with that accent. You can ask them if they're from New Zealand, but you can't ask them if they're from Australia,
mhm.
because Australians don't care if you accidentally call them New Zealanders, but New Zealanders are really upset if you call them Australians.
Hmm.
And so it you what you do is, by default, you call everybody New Zealanders, because then it's safe on one side and not safe on the other. So you call everybody a man, because the women don't get as upset. So, right.
Yeah,
But
but
I
it's
mean, I'm talking about in the South in general.
right. But it's adapting. Is
It's
Shatner
adapting.
willing? Is Shatner willing to adapt and change his ways? And that, I don't know him. He seems like he's his. It seems like his biggest issue, of course, is constantly being referred to as Kirk. He wanted to get away from that, but now he's
Yeah,
kind of come
although
back
now
around.
what's
Yeah,
really weird is now he actually is accepting,
coming
as
back around
in
to it.
his old age. Everybody has come around. And we have to be fair to the original cast. They just joined a TV show.
Hmm. They had
You
no
know, they
idea what they
didn't
were getting
know.
into.
They had no idea. People who join Discovery are very aware that they are joining a cult.
And if they weren't, they're told very quickly upon signing up. You know what you're getting into.
Right.
Um,
Even the next gen actors have acknowledged that. The next gen actors, it was, are you, this could get big, this could be the end of it,
mhm.
yada, yada, yada. But by the time the DS9 and the Voyager actors were being hired, it's like, guys, this is massive
Uh-huh.
and you're going to be stuck in it for the rest of your lives. Are you okay with that? Which is one of the reasons why all of them make the circuit, the convention circuits, and they pretty much all do, with some notable exceptions. I'm looking at you, Avery Brooks, whom I'd love to go see and love to hear all of your stories, but you won't ever go to conventions, and makes me sad. Because you've got stories, I'm sure, that we've never heard them. And and like some of the original cast, especially the lesser cast, the ones that felt like they weren't the leading stars, they were much more quick to jump into the convention circuit. I mean, I've seen everybody. Well, I've seen everybody, but I remember seeing Walter Koenig multiple times. I interviewed Walter Koenig. He walked out on me. Um, this is still a horrifying moment in my life.
Mm.
But looking back on it, it's kind of funny. But anyway, um, Walter Koenig I've seen multiple times. I've seen George Takei multiple times, and Nichelle Nichols. Nichelle Nichols, she kissed me right here. Anyway, Nichelle Nichols. Even Jimmy Doohan, but D. Kelly and Leonard Nimoy and Shatner, I've only seen from afar. I've never been very close to them,
Mhm.
and it's because they were the leading characters. They were the big three, and of course D. Kelly passed away in '99 before we ever did any of this stuff. So there was no way. And I mean, Jimmy Doohan passed away not long after that. So
You've rabbit holed yourself a few times already, no?
I always rabbit hole myself.
Well,
I didn't sleep well last night.
apparently.
We're running on about 4 hours of sleep. So I'm glad you were like, go get more coffee. I'm like, okay.
I can't remember which actor it was, but I remember seeing an interview with someone from Deep Space Nine and them talking about how they were asked when they auditioned and were hired if they knew what they were getting into. And they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. And so they had to explain to them, yeah, this is a career choice. You're going to be Star Trek. That's your career.
Right.
You might do other stuff, but you'll always be known as that guy on Star Trek. So,
but let's talk also about franchise, because this is an interesting thing. And yes, this is a rabbit hole.
Well, before you do that, we should mention that we are sponsored by
Kieran Games. I believe we're still sponsored by Geekway Homes, but I'm not 100% sure. But if we're not, we still love the guy.
We'll say it anyway.
And your mom.
And
where are we with Shiny Garden? Do we know?
Well, we're still buddies.
We love Shiny Garden.
Yeah, I don't think they have anything coming up immediately.
No, because they had to cancel Hexacon, and that was horrible.
Cancel Hexacon. I will say that Genghis Khan is coming up, and I need to contact them directly because the media route that I tried, I have not heard back. But I do have a contact email. I need to just send it in to them and say, hey, do you want us there or not?
Up a little. Yeah.
Yep. So, but for Shiny Garden Productions, I'm not sure when their next thing's going to be scheduled.
I don't know either. We'll have to find out.
Yeah.
So that's a thing. But let's go. I was gonna.
Franchises.
The franchises, because you were just saying something, and it sparked a thought process. When the DS9 guys and the Voyager guys were hired in, it was okay. You know that you'll be going to conventions the rest of your life, and they were like, and that's what happened. Now it's different. Now I hire Troy to be part of the Marvel universe, and I say, okay, you can't text or put anything on Facebook that says any of these 12 things, ever again, because now your face belongs to us. And I've noticed that there is a definite change in what's going on. And it's back to what we were talking about. Now that Bill Shatner is going kind of weird and he's starting to run off the beaten path, he's not making Star Trek look good in general. J.K. Rowling has this massive thing that is insane. And they couldn't control her because the franchise exists because of her. There was no franchise before this. But you think about the actors that joined. I remember something that was really funny. Emma Watson did a photo shoot, which somehow was very racy and not exposed her breasts, but got really close to exposed or something. And everybody lost their mind. And she was like, they're my breasts. I have a right to do with them as I please. And I was like, you know what? You go, girl. That's exactly what you should be doing. They're yours.
Do you know if that was after? It only matters slightly, but do you know if that was after all of the Harry Potter movies were done with?
Or it was after. It wasn't during.
So
she was way too young.
Yeah, so it's she's not going back. It's done.
Yeah, it's done. But no, this was like 4 years ago, 3 years ago, something like that.
Well, Gina Carano got fired from Mandalorian because of stuff she was saying on Twitter. And so it's one of these, and that's Disney. You got to be very careful where you tread with Disney.
Well, what's interesting is also she was being conservative, which is where Disney usually goes. But Disney is not running conservative these days. So there's that. And Disney's running more on the liberal side, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And to be fair, the things she was saying were really weird. Because she was doing an awful lot of the. She was doing the
the
anti-vaxxer stuff.
Yeah, and I think it was that, and I think there might have been some stuff related to kind of like what J.K. Rowling was saying as well. I didn't look into it very deeply.
Yeah, it was she was anti-trans and or whatever. She was heading in that zone. So there's
what's interesting
and that gets
too,
tangly.
I didn't realize how deep this ran, but with John Cena, he developed a lot of enemies. And I had to look into it because I'm like, well, what did he do? Because the new show, The Patriot, is that I'm getting the wrong name, aren't I? From Suicide Squad. Man, I'm gonna have to look it up now. I can't believe I totally have forgotten. And of course, it's not showing me here. Peacemaker. Sorry, Peacemaker is the character he played in the remake. Not so much a remake, and he's an over the top. The character's an over the top. What if you took patriotism way too far type character,
Right.
superhero? But I was noticing in comments a lot of people saying, "I'll never watch this show because it is John Cena and he's a traitor to America." And I'm like, what did he do? So I looked it up, and apparently all he did is at some point he said something calling Taiwan a country, which I guess is a big no-no for China because China considers that it owns Taiwan.
Yes.
And they're very offended if you call it its own country. And so he apologized to China for calling that a country. And he learned how to do it and did so in Mandarin, which is impressive to me. But I guess him apologizing to China for some people show weakness, and that weakness means he's like,
yeah, that's right. For a while during our previous president's administration, there was quite a bit of, I want to say, like anytime, especially during to the people who we consider enemies, which would be at the time China and Russia. Is still probably true today. Anytime anybody conceded anything to them, it was considered unpatriotic, because the concession alone was considered weakness. And of course, the truth of the matter is, in the real world, you have to be diplomatic, or else the only answer will always be shoot each other until and whoever's left standing is the one who's right. Well, that's great, but it could be a misunderstanding. It could be, any number of things could occur. And what we have learned, if there's anything humans have learned, is the old shoot each other and whoever and let God sort them out sort of thing is only good to a certain degree, because most of us actually agree on most things. So,
well, from what I've looked up, apparently only a few countries consider Taiwan a separate country, and America is not one of them. So technically, he would have been incorrect in what he said, if you're going to look at it just as rules as written. So I think what he did was probably the correct diplomatic thing to do. It sounds like there's a far bigger problem here, just like with Hong Kong and China, and that as deep as China has their claws in Disney, if John Cena ever wanted to work for Disney, he needed to make sure that they were happy with him. So I think it would have hurt him far more in his career had he not apologized than him losing the few friends or the few fans who think that he's now like some kind of communist or something.
Right.
But
yeah, I agree. Man, we could do an entire show on China.
And then I have to pull up that thing that I had before where we pretended to get our website hacked by China and blocked.
Right.
But yeah, when you're talking about people having to be careful with what they say, it really extends far beyond what I think some people can even imagine with that. And But yeah, as far as Joss Whedon goes, not a fan of Joss Whedon, but I'm a fan of his work. I've started to view things the way I like to look at it now is people's creations are their children, and even though Guy's a horrible person, doesn't mean Kai's going to be a horrible kid. So
Right.
I'm not going to dislike the kid just because the parent's bad.
Yeah.
So, yeah, although you're not a bad parent, you're a decent person.
I
I'll say
appreciate that.
as-
I know that you
as
didn't need to
as-
quantify that. I follow.
but it's fun.
Um,
It's fun to quantify afterwards. But Firefly is for me. I think it's an awesome show and a lot of fun, and I'm going to watch it again. I have the board game Firefly, which is a cooperative game where everybody plays crew members and you do jobs. I'm not going to get rid of that
right.
because it's a fun game. Just because its origin comes from a person who is questionable in their morals and probably not a very nice person,
You're
doesn't
not going
mean
to
you
get
need
rid
to
of
get
your
rid of that.
Serenity over there.
Nope.
It's sitting over on the shelf.
You're never going to get that.
I know. I keep trying.
Yeah.
It's on my to-do list. I wonder if anybody has made a Serenity that has like removable tops so you can get into all the little decks inside, because it was one of the, as Brent is probably like, oh, but the reason why I went through such detailed deck plans of my ship is because Serenity felt real, because they built the sets as if it was the ship.
Mhm.
And so it was, when you were in a space, you knew where you were relative to the rest of the ship. And it all felt connected and it all felt like one ship. And I loved the feel of that. Whereas, the Enterprise, I don't know, you could be anywhere
Yeah.
except the bridge. You know where the bridge is.
Any hallway looks like any other hallway.
Yeah, that's because it is.
Yep.
And
so, were you talking about
so-
for like a model, like a multi-layer
yeah, I
model?
wonder if they've got
I've
like a
seen.
little
I've seen.
STL
Yeah.
STL
There's.
model out there, some that I could print on my printer and get it to do that, because that would be really cool, actually.
Yeah, I've seen miniature sized models like that where you can remove the top and play inside of it. So
I think that'd be cool. Anyway, the moving back to where we were, Brent's saying your social standing would be lowered unless you pay a lot of money to increase it.
Yeah.
I don't know. How corrupt is China's government? Who knows? It could be anything. It could be totally corrupt, or they may be following their absolute rules to the letter. The social credit thing, I see that as, really nothing more than our credit system. I mean, it's no different. Theirs is just that theirs is a communism, so they don't really have to worry about you extending too much on money. So instead, they worry about you extending too much on social stuff.
like what would happen with the tennis player?
Yeah. What tennis player? She doesn't exist.
But she's back in existence now, and she said it was all totally a misunderstanding.
Right. She probably also has a better car and a better house now.
She's alive.
She's alive. Well, and I don't know. I mean, who knows? Anything
Right.
could happen. We the only real experience that we as Gen Xers have of what the world of a communism was Russia, when it was the Soviet Union. And who knows what that was? That's from movies that we saw,
Mhm.
which were made by Americans. So, I mean, yes, I've got a couple of Russian buddies whom I know it wasn't fun. So, legit, it wasn't fun. But how wasn't fun? We don't know for sure. We only know what my Russian buddies who lived in Russia during the 80s and escaped Russia say, right. Well, and that's the thing, like, any decks, would they be different? That was another thing. Babylon 5 had a color coding system for all of their hallways,
Just like Colorado Mills.
just like Colorado Mills. But the thing was, they had a color coding system, so when they were on brown 32 or whatever, that was like the lowest part of Babylon 5. When you were on the blue 23 or whatever, it was the upper decks, and then it was like all these different colors. And I thought that was so cool too, because again, You had a physical feel. When the actors were on the brown layer levels, it was a physical thing. I'm feeling defensive because I got called out for being totally off target, and Brent wasn't wrong.
Okay.
He called me out, and he was right. And so now I'm all defensive. Problem is, he was totally right. Absolutely right. So anyway, but yeah, that's kind of moving back to separating the artist from the art.
Mm-hmm.
Separating the artist from the art.
Well, also before we roll out, same time frame, the comedian Louis Anderson also passed away.
Yes.
From battle with cancer. So it's I knew of him. I didn't really follow his career very closely though, but I know that he, just like Meatloaf, he had a strong
A
following
very
of
loyal
fans.
following.
Yeah.
And our hearts go out to all those geeks who
Yep.
lost a member of their geekdom. I mean, that's the thing. I think in the end, we may not have understood Meatloaf ourselves, but we understand being in the fandom.
Mhm.
We understand loving that person, their music, what they were doing, and we grasp that. And so we feel for you, and it seems trite to say we're sorry for your loss, but we're sorry for your loss. And it's true. It's legit.
Mhm.
I mean, I lost Leonard Nimoy once. That was a while back, but it happened, and that hurt. That hurt badly. You lost Robin Williams. That hurt badly. And we understand what it's like to, the wall colors change in B5. We understand what it's like to, I know it's the delay. It's so delayed. We understand what it's like to lose a member of your geekdom family.
But like they say, as long as you remember them, they're not truly gone. And
Which we literally said about Spock, literally on screen.
Yep.
It's canonical.
So luckily all of their previous creations live on, and you can still enjoy their music and their comedy.
Yeah, we can. I mean, I was just, George, whatever his name is that I just lost. Burns. Thank you,
What?
George.
Did
Burns.
we just lose him?
No, but I was just thinking about how funny he was.
Oh,
how much of my childhood was lit up by the old guy with a cigar.
I was going to say, then we started it off with you saying he died in '96, and you keep thinking we just lost him, and now you just said we just lost him.
Because a quote came up this morning on Reddit that was George Burns, and I went, "Oh yeah, he died a couple of years ago." And when I looked it up, it's been 25 years.
A couple dozen years ago.
Yeah. So I was like, "Oh, well."
Yeah, take that.
Yeah. I mean, I thought for sure we were hearing George Burns jokes, like in 2015 or so, which we probably were, but there were recordings,
Mm-hmm.
But that's the thing. George Burns's comedy still lives on. Meatloaf's music still lives on. We can still watch Spock. We can go back and watch Robin Williams.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the stuff that Robin Williams did was just so bizarre. And so, we grasp that. So there we go. I think I've gone way off on all kinds of rabbit holes, and I didn't mean to.
Mm-hmm.
But again, no sleep.
Yep.
I actually am going to go for my walk with Alex, and then I think I'm going to come back and then go back to bed.
Okay.
I think that's my plan. I think I'm not qualified to do work today until I get a couple more hours in. So, because I think I am all over the board and not quite capable to take a nap. George Burns, Mel Brooks, Richard Pryor, Gene Wilder. Yeah.
Well, Brooks is still alive, I think.
Yep. But he's saying the greats of the 80s, and I concur.
Right.
those guys are definitely the greats of the 80s, the kids I grew up on. Eddie Murphy, who's also still alive. Even Will Smith. I was just recently looking at that and realizing Will Smith's actually older than me, and I didn't know that. But getting into Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was actually kind of fun. And now I actually kind of enjoy Will Smith's rap, weirdly, because his raps are really kind of innocent.
Getting jiggy with it.
Yeah, they're and considering the fact that so much rap could be so violent and horrible, his raps are just like all happy and fluffy. Well, I mean, even when he was dealing with the Nightmare on Elm Street, it was still fluffy.
He's the baby metal. He's the rap of baby metal.
Right. He's like baby metal rap. It's beautiful. So
On that, we should end it.
we'll end there, calling Eddie Murphy the baby metal of rap.
Will
Check
Smith.
us.
Will Smith. Will Smith, not
Or
Eddie
Will
Murphy.
Smith. What did I say? Eddie Murphy? Will Smith. Will Smith, the baby metal of rap.
All right.
And we're going on we're going to go on record for that.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll let you. We'll say that we're done now.
Yeah, I got the closing ready. So
Okay, you
say
ready?
it. I'm ready.
Okay. That's all the time we've got for today. I've been Guy,
I've been Troy.
and this is Geek Tank.